The ending of the light, part 1 down below. And for that, I needed to be punished. Degradation is the natural outcome of soul loss, and I was exactly at that point. Thus, my method of debasing myself was to stealthily leave and sleep with the guy. I was unclean. That's what I was entitled to. I despised him, and I hated myself. However, I can't really defend my behavior by blaming it only on self-destructive impulses. The bonding was fantastic. The man wasn't it. He was not very good. However, the blatant immorality of what I was doing evoked strong, unfamiliar emotions. The taking of risks was delectably impure, and the moments I spent with him were fascinating in a strangely debauched sense, because I suddenly saw myself as nothing more than a dirty woman. And for a while, the intensity of those emotions kept reality from reaching me. One day, though, I just woke up. It did not take place over an extended length of time. I suddenly had a brilliant spark of understanding. I had the most ideal man in the world. He fulfilled all of my needs, and all of that was at risk because I was secretly developing a bond with a low-life scumbag lawyer who was also a mediocre toy. Amazing. It resembled waking up from a nightmare. However, I was aware that it wasn't a dream, and I became terrified when I realized what I was doing. Ordinary people don't usually start off doing horrible things, in my opinion. They act badly as a result of losing their basic understanding of reality. My spouse defined me over a span of 12 years, and I based my entire existence on that knowledge. I then severed the exclusive ties. It required a masterwork in seduction. Still, everything altered as a result. I was corrupt, that much was my new reality, and it required some time for me to realize that that was not the only option. When I realized what I had been doing, I looked at my circumstances more realistically. It made no difference how much I loved my spouse or how faithful I had been up until that time. The truth was that I was breaking an inexcusable law, one that made me fear for all I treasured, and I was the only one who had the power to reclaim my life. The fact that I was positive I would never wander again helped to lessen my guilt to some extent. I had never given my fidelity any serious thought before O'Leary entered our life. It was merely a state I took for granted, one that would never alter. After O'Leary, being vigilant was my top priority. Now I was ready to demolish any man who showed the tiniest suggestion of impropriety, no matter how small. What made me lie to Jake, then? As self-serving and hypocritical as it may sound today, I felt as though I was lying to keep him safe. The act was completed already. That was a known fact. Additionally, there was no going back. It didn't take a genius to see that if he found out, it would break his heart. I therefore made every effort to spare him the agony. Admittedly, I was also avoiding the consequences. But in my opinion, realistically, those two things were too closely related to be separated. That speaks something about my morality, I think. Even though I was going through a confusing time, one thing was certain: I loved my husband. And in order to keep from harming him, I would sell my soul, which I most likely already had. In a similar vein, I understood that I might improve myself by utilizing my shame and guilt. All I could do was hope that if I put in enough effort to compensate Jake, the balance would eventually come into equilibrium. I came to the realization that cutting Mr. Tom out of my life was an essential first step, and I had to make sure Jake would never find out how I did that. I lost my bravery, confronted the guy, and ended our relationship. It was at an inoffensive location, so he could not make a scene. Just that one action relieved me of a great deal of burden. Still, the sly pig continued to call and beg and plead with me. It was an incredibly unmanly act of sniveling. However, I was adamant. I believed that I had escaped punishment, and I was starting to act in accordance with my new destiny, which was to make Jacob the most lavishly fed husband in Western civilization history. That was the moment when everything fell apart around me. I am not perfect. The idea that I am the world's brightest person, though, is the one that has upset me the most. I had forgotten Jake's intelligence. More to the point, I had forgotten what he did for a living. I was forced to face my complete failure as a human and the terrible nature of my behavior when he confronted me with his mountain of proof. The days that followed his departure were agonizing. The fact that I realized I deserved all that had occurred to me only made it worse. I used my entire trip to gather my thoughts. I just cried, so I couldn't have been much use anyhow. I realized that I was suddenly on my own, and in order to survive, I had to draw myself back from the edge. Jake had not filed for divorce outright, so he'd left the door open. Hence, hope persisted, however flimsy, and I was going to cling desperately to that prospect. The call from O'Leary's wife was my only solace. I deserved to be called all kinds of disgusting lady, like she had done. However, I did learn something from her tirade. She was taking Tom O'Leary to the dry cleaners after he was dismissed and disbarred. I was ready to take my punishment. In fact, I welcomed it as due punishment for my transgression. However, it was satisfying to find that the seducer had also taken a fair share of the axe. I thought to myself, gloomily satisfied, you jerk, karma really is a heartless woman. I didn't realize how truly terrible it might be until much later. It's no longer fun. Jake, the spouse of Britt Ashley Barnes, and I were seated at the Turf Tavern. I was sipping my pint and gazing at the ivy on New College's wall. In British parlance, new is a relative phrase. As soon as the Black Death ended in 1347, the college was established. That led to the deaths of many clergymen. To make up for the losses, the church was forced to construct a new college. The moniker stayed. Americans find it a bit difficult to comprehend the breadth of British history. The old Oxford town wall is adjacent to the turf. Although the building is only 400 years old, its foundations are 800 years old. Furthermore, the turf has seen a great deal of Oxford history, notably the riots in 1354 that gave rise to the name Town and Gown. However, the turf's most significant historical event from an American perspective was that a former U.S. the president is said not to have breathed in there. I resemble Jake Barnes a much. Aside from having the same name, he is American, a graduate of GMU, and just as much of a nerd as I am. Furthermore, he is wed to a woman who has my intelligence, beauty, and amazing talent. Even though Sasha hadn't filed for divorce, I still thought of her as my spouse. I figured she was probably sleeping with half of DC's elite. However, I was truly ignorant. She and I had not spoken for the previous 20 months. After I departed, she did send me a lengthy email. Rather than issuing a self-serving entreaty pleading with me to return, she sent a respectful and kind apology for her actions. She said to me that she was aware of how difficult it would be to forgive her acts. However, she expressed her hope that I would finally manage to reintegrate her into my life. She concluded by promising to stay by my side through thick and thin, no matter what. It was nearly 2 years prior, which, considering how different my current circumstances were from our marriage, felt like an eternity. To start with, I was completely alone myself. Other than my work, I had nothing to look forward to, and I worked on it for 10 hours every day. In many respects, research was fulfilling. But occasionally, I was overcome by loneliness. My closest friend and lifelong companion was terribly missed. I believe that since I was still married to her, I couldn't engage in extracurricular activities. Thus, since Sasha and I broke up, I had only used my right hand to sleep. Britt and I became friends at the OCL. She is doing threat modeling research, and I am doing attack prediction research, so we spent a lot of time exchanging ideas. Britt is another incredibly lovely woman, much like Sasha. Sasha's attractiveness, however, is more exotic, nuanced, and alluring like a Fabergé egg. Additionally, Sasha has a far more visceral effect on people. Like the powerful Volga, you can feel the strength of the deep emotions that flow behind her stunning facade. Britt is an authentic English rose, which sets her apart from Sasha. Britt's attraction is strong yet calm and magnificently majestic, like to the Thames on a glorious English summer's day. The dignity, grace, and exquisite charm of ancient English beauties, such as Gainsborough, Catherine, and Diana, are radiated by her magnificent round face and her spooky gray eyes. You would characterize her public persona with adjectives like intriguing and striking. But behind closed doors, she's the most witty, sardonic, grounded individual I know. The other Jake, her spouse, is a little mysterious. Like me, you would think that he was simply a lucky nerd who happened to fall in love and be married to a woman who was much older than him if you met him. He is as wealthy as Croesus, though. He is genuinely worth millions since he patented a method that does data compression more effectively than any other available technique. In fact, if you met him, you would think that, with his completely unworldly attitude and complete lack of sense of style, he was me. We even share a similar appearance. He is 5 inches shorter, though. Along with a pair of spaniels and the loveliest little daughter you've ever seen, he and Britt reside up on Boars Hill. Brooke is a bright youngster. She has the vocabulary of an Oxford undergraduate at 4 years old. She also enjoys words a lot. I have to explain unfamiliar words to her, including their definition, pronunciation, and etymology. She observes me doing it with somber eyes, observing every detail. I predict that one day Lady Brooke will be employed by the same company as her parents, Uncle Jake, and Mother. I adore my two friends, but I also feel a little envious of their contented marriage and the wonderful life they share with their intelligent little daughter. I had all that was desired in a once-in-a-lifetime woman, but it ended in heartbreak for both of us. When I walked out on Sasha, I was still trying to figure out what I had wanted to do. She had conducted a brief covert affair, treating me with contempt and humiliation, and that obviously called for repercussions. I'll harm you back if you hurt me. If you speak it out, it sounds a little childish. But when I walked out, that was what was on my mind. Still, I would have said without a doubt, yes. If you had asked me if I wanted to stay married to Sasha, that's not as crazy as it seems. Everyone carries around vague emotions, and you only act on those feelings based on which side of the equation helps you the most, unless you are completely self-destructive. It seemed like the correct decision to separate at the moment. I wasn't so sure now. You realize that there is no such thing as absolute right or absolute wrong if you are a decently competent person. It all depends on how you choose to interpret things. Do you not trust me? Choose any 10 commandment to focus on, such as thou shalt not kill. Considering that clear-cut rule, is shooting someone who breaks into your home morally acceptable? Remember that you are breaking a holy commandment if you actually do shoot the fellow. No exoneration clauses exist. It clearly states, no killing. Not an exception. How then do you defend your behavior? You'll definitely find some gray area, I'm sure of it. and you'll surely be absolved of any moral responsibility for whatever you come up with. Alright, so that fulfills the 6th commandment. Let's go on to the following commandment now. Is there the same wiggle room for adultery? Why not, if it's not? By walking away from Sasha, I had made my statement about how I felt about her actions. I didn't lose any pride. I'm scoring 1 for you. But now I was also terribly lonely and depressed. And there was absolutely no chance that I could find another lady to take her place. Take 1 away from me. It did not come as a surprise to me that I was thinking contradictory things. It had been nearly 2 years since the catalyst incident, yet even then, I knew I still loved my wife and was finding it harder and harder to live without her. Too much time had passed, and that was the issue. Furthermore, she would have had an excessive number of chances to start over with a different man. Sasha is an incredibly gorgeous woman. Thus, it was inevitable that she would now be with someone else. That thought was something I detested. However, what action might I take? Short-term decisions we make can have devastating long-term effects. I probably ought to have filed for divorce from her or stayed and attempted to work through our issues. I never should have skated alone. I didn't think I would want to stay. However, I also didn't start the divorce. That was a result of my desire for simplicity. That proved to be a poor decision, because I knew all the while that Sasha was still my wife. I had long since forgiven her, and if we had been living in Washington, D.C., I might have even tried to make amends. I never questioned Sasha's devotion. I never questioned her honest wish to make amends for her transgression. Even before I left the house, I was aware of that. I nevertheless departed. You may be wondering, why? The issue was that, since it was no longer exclusive, our marriage ceased to be unique. Everyone makes the same life assumptions. You get to know your true love. You promise to be faithful no matter what, and then you pass away in each other's arms. That scenario never contains anything involving another man. And there's the catch. Not just the sexual component of your married life, but every aspect of it becomes uncertain as a result of infidelity. You might wonder if she's drawing comparisons between her time with him and the time you had together. And you wonder to yourself, is she thinking about all of the similar times with him? When you are doing activities together, even on a typical weekday evening, while you laze about the house, you worry if she longs to be with him. Naturally, every detail of your bodily existence is being closely examined. Does she sound the same way when she's with him? Does she treat him in the same way? Worse, is she more daring and passionate with him? Ultimately, the fact that Sasha had slept with another man wasn't the main problem. That only applies to the material world. Furthermore, it didn't really matter in the long run. Rather, it was the unavoidable reality that she was open to divulging her intimate personal details to him. The game of marriage is zero-sum. Your spouse takes from you everything he offers to another man. As a result, Sasha's hooking up with O'Leary lessened the specialness of our connection. Furthermore, I saw no way to recreate the special bond we shared prior to her straying. That was the deciding factor. Brit is far more perceptive than I am, or her spouse. That's why she rescued me from all of my Hamlet-esque thinking. With a plummy upper-class drawl, she asked, "You're thinking about her again, aren't you, Jake?" Her worry always betrays her blue blood roots. I replied, "I can't help it. It's like I've led 2 lives, and I am having a hard time adjusting to the new one." The other Jake replied, "Been there, done that, have the t-shirt." The killer is the sudden shift in reality. My wife arranged a trap so I could meet her new husband-to-be. One minute I was happily married and the next I didn't have a friend in the world. Yanking the rug out from under a person ruins their trust in everything and everybody. She stretched out and touched his arm in return. He remarked, looking lovingly at Brit, "I was living like a feral cat until I met Brit. It is amazing what the love of a good woman can do for a man." I experienced a jealous moment. With bitterness, I remarked, "I had all of that once, but she threw it away." With her perceptive gray eyes fixed on mine, Brit asked, "How did she do that?" "You never told us the story." I stated, "As far as I was concerned, we had a perfect marriage. We were compatible on every level and we shared everything. It was like we were one soul." Then I discovered that she had a short and very intense affair with a person she was working with. She was seduced by a master, no doubt about that. But I didn't have a clue through it all. It shattered my belief in myself and in life's inevitabilities. "Do I have to explain that?" I asked her, glancing at her. She looked me in the eye and replied, "No, you don't have to explain that. You just presume that good things will happen if you do good things. That's karma, the cosmic balancing principle. So it shakes your confidence in the fundamental assumptions of your life when a bad thing happens without any discernible reason." Then she paused, gave me a serious look, and continued, "But of course, if you follow the logic to its obvious conclusion, something good will have to happen in order for the universe to rebalance." I went to the other Jake and said, "You're a lucky man." He gave me a smile of pure agreement and replied modestly, "I know." I winked at her and said, "You never fail to cheer me up, Brit." After consuming my pint, I placed it on the table and got up to start my evening walk to my rooms along Cat Street. It was Saturday the following day. Although I preferred to eat breakfast in the dining hall, that didn't mean I wasn't going into the lab. Thus, while I was getting ready for work, it was closer to 10 o'clock. A college porter came knocking on my door. "There's a visitor at the porter's lodge, Gov," he exclaimed as soon as I opened it. "Just wrapping up," I said. "Tell him I'll be down in a second." The porter appeared as though he would speak. Rather than turning, he went back the way he had come. Taking my cap and laptop, I crossed Lyddon Quad and headed in the direction of the lodge. Oxford had a beautiful spring day. The fresh scent of the grass was energizing, and I could hear the small birds in the ivy pursuing insects with much enthusiasm. With the exception of Britt and Jake, I didn't know who would be calling on me. The head porter nodded toward the main gate as I entered the lodge. A little figure was standing there. She was the one. I could only make out a long braid of unkempt blonde hair and a thick wool trench coat. It was like an H-bomb to me. Stabilizing myself with my hand against the tunnel wall, I hesitantly whispered, "Sasha." It seemed like no time had passed as she turned to face me. Her expression was a mix of fear and happiness. I just stood there in shock, not knowing how to respond. After gaining her composure, she grinned sarcastically and added, "Hello, Jake. I guess you're surprised to see me." I stood there like a fish out of water, my mouth moving, while I continued to try to orient myself. I attempted a smooth laugh, but it came out sounding more like a death rattle. "God, she was gorgeous," I remarked. "That's an understatement." Her voice was reserved. "I know you don't want to talk to me, but there is something that you absolutely need to know. Can you meet me at the Randolph in an hour so that we can talk about it?" I'll be brief. Seeing her was like coming across a cool mountain spring after dying of thirst, and I thought, take a lifetime. I kept looking at her nonstop. Still hesitant, she nodded and leaned out to give me a forearm squeeze. The grief in her eyes was visible to me. After that, she turned and quickly left. I was feeling a lot of different things, which was a miracle in and of itself, since I had not been able to feel anything for the previous 20 months. Seeing her excited me beyond belief. It was unrelated to how beautiful she was. It was the sense of tranquility I experienced. It was similar to the relief you would have upon entering a secure, well-known harbor after braving a fierce storm at sea. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I was stress-free. It felt as though the peace had fallen into place, making me entire once more. More importantly, I was free of the hollow feeling of futility that had followed me around the entire time we were separated. Indeed, when probing my mind, I found not even the slightest trace of repressed resentment, mistrust, or jealousy. I hear you wonder, why? Okay, so, essentially, a new chapter has been written by the passing of time. I was also a different person. I had severe cultural shock when I changed from being a contented academic married to a reclusive nerd overnight, especially considering that I had just moved to a whole new society. I had to change in order to survive. After nearly 2 years, my perception of reality was so different from my existence in Washington, D.C., that I felt as though I had never experienced it. And as a result, I wrestled with who I had become for extended periods of time during the darkest hours of the night. I therefore saw Sasha and life in general from a completely new and pure perspective, as if she had been a complete stranger, which she actually was. Then it dawned on me. Without a question, Sasha had evolved on her own. We were both college students with little life experience when we first got married. And as we grew older, we developed together. Not that we weren't where we were, I hesitate to say, and wiser. But Sasha was not going to be the person I left crying in that room if she had changed as much as I had over the previous 2 years. In fact, as I made my way up St. Giles to the Randolph, it was impossible to guess with whom I could strike up a conversation. I assumed that she had at last presented the divorce documents to me. Sasha's desire to deliver them personally rather than send them to me via mail like a vengeful lady just seemed to fit her personality. She just was like way. To be honest, I was shocked that it had taken her so long. In the DC social scene, a person with Sasha's beauty, social skills, and desirability would not last long. That was a truth I'd long since come to terms with. I had faith that she would eventually make a connection. To be completely honest, I wasn't very sad about our marriage's conclusion when I entered the Randolph. To be honest, it was almost a relief when she eventually took off the other shoe. Upon entering through Beaumont Street, I noticed her seated in the eatery next to reception. Rather of appearing anxious, she exuded poise and composure. She was wearing a pale gray silk dress by Laura Ashley with a floral design. It triggered those enormous feline eyes of hers. As I hurried in, she stood up to welcome me. I think my appearance reflected my internal strife and disarray. I just observed her as I had both of her hands in mine. It astonished me. I saw nothing except love and a hint of amazement. I was not staring into the eyes of a lady who was eager to finish an unpleasant task. I was thinking, well, we had a great life together, so of course she probably still loves me a little bit. I took a seat. She was the one who met. It had been started by her. Thus, when she was ready, we would speak. She placed the scones and tea from the service in front of her, as was customary. I had eaten, I told her. It was the first time she appeared somewhat nervous. Subsequently, her steely demeanor became evident as she got started. She said, "I know you told me to not bother you, but there is something that you absolutely have to know. I am sorry that it took so long for me to tell you this, but it has been a difficult time since you left. I think you will understand in a minute." Reaching for her phone, she dialed a number. Then she turned to face me and poured me a cup of tea after saying, "He's here." "You are really going to want this," she remarked, passing it to me. I am aware that the English believe that a nice cup of tea can make any issue better. However, I was clueless as to why I would require one at that specific time. I was ready to accept that our marriage was ended because I knew what was about to happen. I was waiting for the joyful couple to declare their engagement to make room for the tall, dark, and attractive stranger. I was content with the decision I had made to leave. That's when her mom showed up, and the world skewed. The family of Sasha is from Hawaii. Why was her mom in this place? I felt that her inviting her mother to the official serving of the papers was a touch too classless. And the future husband, where was he? It was then that I saw her mother had a bundle in her arms. She came to a stop and stood close to the table. She turned around then and showed off the most exquisite creature on God's verdant world. "Jake, I want you to meet your daughter," Sasha stated. "Everybody experiences a revelation of everlasting truth at some point in their lives. I owned this. Those ice blue eyes were so beautiful, so clever, so cheerful that I lost myself in them. I may have loved her mother, but this was a whole other kind of love. And at that moment, I realized that this exquisite little thing was the eternal focus of my universe. I was in complete and utter amazement as I sat there gazing at her. With a document out of her purse, Sasha began her pitch like a responsible adult. "I know what you're thinking. She's been tested and she is yours. The DNA evidence is right here. Documentation? I don't need no stinking documentation," roared my inner voice, laughing. This brilliant little creature and I were already conversing. She was obviously my daughter, and I was aware that I would gladly brave the hellfire in her honor. Pause. Sasha's narrative. It took me about a month to get over my terrible public persona. The crying fits kept me cooped up in my office at work. Additionally, I never went out in public for the same reason. However, I was starting to embrace my new circumstances. I was by myself, and it was my own foolish actions that put me in that predicament. However, guilt has two sides to it. It hurts. However, if you have a strong will, that suffering can also be redeeming. I knew that the pain Jake and I were experiencing was a direct result of my sins, but accepting your shortcomings can lead to some sort of redemption. My soul was being burned of hubris by the ensuing guilt. Since I am generally brighter than most people, I truly believed that I could have it both ways. I now realize that was just a sign of my own conceit, and I deserved to have my ambitions dashed, just like all mortals who aim too high. It was now time for me to own up to my mistakes and transgressions. Then afterwards, making the most of that acceptance as inspiration to live a better life moving forward. I knew I was capable of more. However, it doesn't happen by accident that you can forgive yourself. To become the person I wanted to be, I had to put in a lot of effort to have a fresh perspective on who I was. My goal was to become wiser by one step each day. Upon learning that my spouse had abandoned me, I was inundated with proposals for male companionship. I even said yes to a couple of dates, since eating tons of ice cream while hiding in my flannel pajamas was not a sustainable strategy. I was aware that I needed to start rebuilding my life by going out there. However, I could never get over equating those men with Jake and lamenting my losses. My dates were just evenings spent with someone else in that sense. Each and every one of those guys anticipated getting laid. All I gave them was a quick peck on the cheek and a thank you before shutting the door. Before I regained my dignity, I had a long way to go, and I did not want any detours or side diversions. While I was thinking about my departed love, the last thing I wanted to do was listen to some lesser man's line of BS. Maybe it's too late now. At last, though, I had complete control over my deceitful desire. To put that beast in its cage for good, my marriage had to tragically collapse. However, the knowledge that it was secured behind iron bars made of regret was consoling, and I had a gut feeling that I had at last become the person I had always desired to be. I felt better about myself after that, and every day I was growing stronger in my sense of enhanced self-worth and well-being. Needless to say, as soon as rumors began to spread that I hadn't sent out invitation, the volume of them fell off dramatically. But I was adjusting to a new reality, so it didn't matter to me. True enough, there is a harsh irony to life. I belong to the group of women who are not your typical ones. However, just like any woman, I have moments when I can't help but think about my monthly check-in. That window appeared and vanished. I didn't see the doctor for a few more weeks. However, I was aware of this beforehand, and I was appalled by it. I've never been a particularly upbeat person. Being both Russian and Slavic, I believe that this is a universal phenomenon. In essence, I belong to the group of people who anticipate the worst outcome for any transgressions they may have made. I had crossed the boundary. I was persuaded by my guilt that I would now be forced to have the kid of a worthless man. I was just overcome with the concept. Everyone must have had moments when something so incredibly horrible that it was better to die. This was my chance. I know I would make a wonderful mother because I adore kids. The idea of being a single parent seemed kind of appealing. I would have someone unconditionally to love. It would offer me a piece of Jake and ease the deep emptiness left by his departure. However, the idea of carrying on Thomas O'Leary's spawn personally repulsed me so much that I would have gladly taken my own life to stop it. There was a lot of connection between Jake and myself when the child inside me was being conceived. However, I understood that this would be my final punishment due to my transgression. I was terrified. So, aside from Jake, of course, I contacted the one person who has always been my rock. My mom is from the former nation. She is as tough and realistic as any former USSR citizen, having grown up during the height of the Soviet era. She met and married my father in the early 1970s while touring America as a dancer with the Bolshoi. He worked as a translator for them. His ancestors had settled here in the 1920s. However, they only got married to other white Russians because they were all members of the same community. I am therefore as Russian as the steppes. My mother, who is in her early 60s, has always served as an inspiration to me. She still possesses the strong body of a trained ballerina, the beauty that only an elderly Russian woman can possess, and the deep Slavic knowledge based on endurance. Picking up her phone, my mother made a call. In a voice that was somewhat more authoritative than Joseph Stalin's, she added, "Hello, Ilya. I will be staying here with Sasha for the foreseeable future. Yes, it is important. No, there is nothing you can do to help. Yes, of course. I love you too." With a determined expression, she turned to face me and stated, "So we wait." Without the support of this strong woman, I could not have survived the next month. Her steady, peaceful presence kept me going. The knowledge that she was in the adjacent room even helped me sleep a little better. The night before the test, I almost passed out. Simply put, the stakes were just too great. However, she comforted me in Russian while holding me while I sobbed. Even though I didn't fully comprehend what she was saying, I could tell that she was referring to the Slavic woman's enduring strength and bravery, and I was unable to see the test results when they were returned after 2 weeks. Like a coiled rattler, the letter merely laid there on the table. When my mother finally shouted, "You are being a fool," she grabbed the letter, read it carefully, and turned to face me beaming. She didn't have to say a thing to me. I broke down in her arms, crying. She was a female, and Jake's. There were times during the pregnancy when I was morning ill and generally uncomfortable. But the most amazing event of my life was sensing Jake's daughter growing inside of me. I so wish I could have told him about it. However, I saw why it was not possible, and I acknowledged that I was partly to blame. But my mother was a very near substitute. She supported me during my worst days and spent hours conversing with little Katerina as she grew. Naturally, the entire conversation took place in Russian. And when my mother would tell my little cat how happy and loved she was going to be once she made her entrance, my little cat would kick like crazy. That would be an absolute assurance, given the spirit of that extraordinary woman. I agonized for a long time over whether or not to inform Jake that I was expecting. It was clear he should have known, and I yearned for his support. However, I also comprehended his reasons for being gone and his desire to be apart from me. Furthermore, I was worried that he would regard the infant as a cheap ruse to win him back. My mother and I had a conversation. He would want to tell me about the birth, she said. However, I persuaded her that he would probably not want to see me again in this lifetime because he was so upset and angry. Furthermore, we both decided that the last thing we wanted him to believe was that I was attempting to use the baby to tie him to me. So when little Katerina was ready to go, we both decided that we would take her to him. I am in excellent physical condition. That is a result of the Bolshoi regimen my mother started me on when I was a young girl. Until I moved out of my house, we worked the bar together. I've never stopped applying what she taught me after that. We made the decision for Jake to meet Kat when she was 10 months old. For several reasons, I wanted to do it in person. It just seemed natural, obviously, to show him his child in person. And I wanted to be present to put any lingering doubts about her paternity to rest. I also wanted to be able to initiate the conversation with him on his parental rights. I cherished the man. I didn't want to cause harm. I was financially secure enough to not require child support. Furthermore, there was no doubt about his right to see her anytime he pleased. Above all, I wanted to reassure him that we would resolve it together because we were still married. Legal complications would not arise at all unless he desired a divorce. I was a little sorry for not bringing Katerina into Jake's life sooner. However, it wasn't as though I was denying her. Because traveling is demanding, she needed time to mature. In any case, it's unlikely that Jake would have loved the first few months. Taking such a small youngster all the way to Oxford worried mother and me a little. However, Katerina is a remarkably calm and happy young child, and ultimately, it seemed like she fared better than we did. After checking into the Randolph, I set out to locate Jake. I wanted the most stress-free introduction to his lovely new daughter for him. In order for me to take Jake's temperature, Mom would look after Kat. I was going to visit him since I knew where he was staying and I wanted to ask him to talk to me. Since he is a decent and fair-minded man, I was confident he would at the very least consent to a meeting. I registered at the guardhouse because I couldn't enter the college by myself, and they dispatched a child to fetch him. Sasha was called as I stood at the entrance to the college's hallway, and there he was. He appeared stunned. Oh no, he's still angry, was my thought as I put on my warmest smile in an attempt to defuse the situation, and I made an effort to convey the irony of my abrupt appearance there. I responded, "Hello, Jake. You must be a little surprised to see me." It appeared as though he was still getting his bearings. In the lowest possible tone, I then said, "There is something that you absolutely need to know." He appeared perplexed. We were going to meet him at the Randolph so we could tell him about his daughter. I therefore requested that we meet in an hour. He gave a vague nod of consent. I turned and hurried off because I didn't want to force the issue. Exactly 1 hour later, he entered reception. I almost threw myself at his feet, begging him to take me back. He was so lovely and tall. However, I stood up, and he grabbed hold of both my hands. He gave me an expression of genuine, unadulterated affection. I was thinking, well, we did have 12 wonderful years, so maybe he still loves me a little bit. We sat and exchanged the required small talk. I wished we could continue doing that indefinitely. However, I had to finish the business I had come for. My mother arrived with Kat wrapped in an ostentatious swaddling blanket after I called her and said, "He's here." Jake was shocked to see my mother and appeared quite irate. I didn't comprehend their response. However, there was little time to consider it as Mom spun around and, with the grace of a ballerina in training, brought Kat to Jake's attention. Polex is not a strong enough word to describe the sight on Jake's face when I said, "Jake, I want you to meet your daughter." He was staring at Kat and she was staring back at him as if they were communicating telepathically, so I started to print the DNA result. Then, in awe, he turned to face me and said, "Thank you." Sasha's eyes were filled with anxiety as she gazed at me. Her mother was observing me with a detached gaze, as if she was waiting for me to demonstrate my manly qualities. I am aware of Sasha's beauty source. Her mother is 60 years old and the most beautiful woman ever. Furthermore, if the mother, as they say, stands behind the daughter like a malignant prophecy, Sasha will be defending herself against males much past the age of retirement. However, her mother is also the most mysterious, jaded, and tough woman I have ever met. Her nationality is Russian, and her views were unmistakably Cold War, particularly with regard to men. I am aware that the life of a Bolshoi dancer was far beyond my experience level, and even Sasha's was. However, there are moments when it feels like the old commie is evaluating me in a way that would make me feel unworthy. Still, Sasha's mother was holding a beautiful little child whose eyes were the only ones I cared about. Those eyes guided me toward what lay ahead for me. They were my commitment and my destiny. They possessed a profound and playful intelligence, and she had the engrossed gaze on my face that only a youngster can direct on a parent. I didn't even know what it meant when I turned to face Sasha and murmured the first thing that came to mind, "Thank you." Was I offering my gratitude to her for this amazing tiny child as a gift? Was I saying that I appreciated her traveling so far to see me? Or was I expressing my gratitude to her for loving me despite the miserable circumstances we were in? Sasha began apologizing for keeping me in the dark longer. She claimed that prior to this, the pediatrician had warned her not to travel. And then she continued, "This baby was conceived in love, before everything changed. I am not using her to bind you to me. I will raise her by myself. I just want you to be able to participate in her life as much as you want to." "I understand." Sasha continued to read from the outdated playbook. In that one, I played the romantic hero consumed by agonizing recollections of her treachery and experiencing the tragic life of a bereaved spouse. I had acted out the role precisely like that. It was an overly dramatic and cliched performance, especially considering this fresh information. I didn't hold it against her. Naturally, the story had taken a different turn the moment I met those radiant little eyes. It was actually quite easy calculus. I had an incident, but it was dead and gone on the one hand. As far as life incidents go, it was a showstopper. However, that was the past. On the other side of the equation lay the future. She was directly before me. She was also stunning. This exquisite little creature, gurgling with pure joy, was the unavoidable solution. And I was quite certain of what needed to occur. "It's not good enough," I murmured, glancing at Sasha. Sasha appeared as though she would cry. One thing was evident on her mother's face, pure scorn. I kept being unwavering. "I am not going to sacrifice one more day of this little girl's life. I know why we separated. But that involved two different people living in a universe long ago and far away. This is here and now. You have given me the ultimate gift. Honor now requires me to do whatever is necessary to nurture and protect it." Sasha appeared to be struggling to take in what I had just said. I could relate to her emotions. I was unsure of what I had just said. I simply knew what needed to occur, and I was aware that working jointly would be necessary. Her mother's hard-bitten expression also changed. Was there even a tinge of deference there? Of course, conceptually, it was a good notion. But in the actual world, the logistics were impractical. Sasha worked in Washington in a lucrative field. I was staying at an English college in a bachelor's room. And like the Red Army at Stalingrad, her mother was stolidly entrenched behind her grandchild. It goes without saying that we had a lot of problems to fix. Jake and Britt saved the day for us. We planned to meet at the Fox Inn later that day. From their Boars Hill home, it was a short stroll, and they couldn't wait to meet the newest members of my family. As we were leaving Sasha's property, a few things transpired. Brookie's interest in me lasted about a nanosecond, but she ran to me excitedly saying, "Uncle Jake." She then noticed Tiny Cat. She then said, "Oh look, an infant," with a shriek. How could someone who is 4 years old use a word like infant? And with that, she ignored me and gave Cat her whole attention. And Cat was responding to her with happy cooing noises. With a certain conviction fit for a small girl, Brookie turned to face me and said, "This is my new baby sister." With Kat in her arms, Sasha's mother leaned over to speak to Brooke, who turned to face the rest of us and triumphantly stated, "Sestra." She was really happy with the new word. She ran back to her parents, who were giddy with joy as they grinned at us. I presented Brit to Sasha. Observing the two women, I saw them go through the scorecard that all attractive women maintain. They agreed to be fast friends and equals. Jake was just staring at Sasha with that look of wonder that every man has when they first see her. Then the two of them focused on Sasha's mother, who was staring at them with hooded eyes, doing her best Boris and Natasha impression. The mother of Sasha has her daughter's flawless features and thick, untidy blonde hair. She still has a gorgeous physique even though she is long past menopause. It was clear that Brit and Jake were unsure of how to react to her. We took Adirondack chairs outdoors and sat in a tight little circle. With a laugh in her voice, Brit, who finds humor in everything, asked, "Weren't we just talking about karma?" I said, "We were indeed. This morning I was a bachelor professor and this evening I am a married man with a beautiful baby daughter." "So you are going to rekindle the marriage then?" asked Jake, furrowing his brow. "You don't have to answer if that's too personal." I understand. Since he had experienced something similar, he was unable to comprehend the sudden shift in course. However, there were a few elements in my situation that were unusual. But above everything, there was Katerina. Regardless of your level of selfishness, having your first child transforms you. All of a sudden, you are faced with a little, dependent person who requires your love and attention. To be honest, if you don't show her your whole attention, you are not a man. Remember that your baby is your eternal self. There will be one person in the world who will remember you long after you pass away. And wonderful recollections are what you want to cherish. Furthermore, perhaps it was just me, but Kat was especially unique because she was raised as a girl. Every father wants to play catch with his son, I guess. However, your daughter awakens a very atavistic nurturing drive. At all costs, you want to be there for her, to take care of her needs, to protect her, and to do everything in your power to bring her happiness. It was also obvious that Sasha wanted to stay married to me and that she still loved me. With the other Jake, it wasn't like that. Jake's wife had moved on to someone else, which was the reason for their divorce. Sasha, on the other hand, had been a loving wife, aside from a particularly memorable 5 weeks. The crime is the crime when it comes to criminology studies. However, what really tells the story is how things were before, during, and after it happened. I recognized the pre-offense behavior perfectly. I had already met the guy, which is why. For the next 5 weeks after that, she had acted like a nasty lady. Quite frankly, that was the reason she was condemned. However, she had become aware of her actions and made the necessary corrections. That was all her own doing, long before she was found out. That provided me with all the necessary information regarding her will to stick to her moral principles. More significantly, she had always been honest from the moment she was found out. She had acted with dignity and respect toward me in our circumstance, accepted the terms I had set, and had not offered any excuses. Neither pleading nor allegations had been made. Furthermore, she had carried the weight of our breakup without grumbling. Lastly, and I'm not sure why this was such a big deal, she had shown me complete faithfulness during our time apart. I understand that a significant portion of the time was spent with a newborn. But after we split up, she must have had a ton of possibilities. And yet, no guy had ever touched that amazing physique, according to Sasha and her mother. Later on, she confided in me that she understood that controlling her treacherous impulses was necessary if she ever hoped to be in a committed relationship. And during that time, that was her only objective. Therefore, in my opinion, Jake's circumstance and mine were different. Actually, as soon as I met Kat's captivating small eyes, I decided to make amends. However, I thought that my decision was justifiable given the 2 years that had passed in Sasha's personal development. Sasha and I found ourselves in an entirely different circumstance. And considering everything, I was positive that we could reunite as a couple. However, it didn't answer the question of how that would be done. I didn't want to get out of the OCL. I was getting along well financially and was making amazing progress. I hadn't talked to Sasha about her work, but I didn't think she would want to part with what she had created. Not to mention the issue of her mother. Clearly, her mother was not going anywhere. I was aware of her husband. He and I had met. He gave the impression of being a kind man. After 30 years of listening in on the Russian submarine fleet's conversation, he had retired as a captain. He had a full head of white hair and was an extremely attractive man. And I realized that Sasha's mother had been eager to marry him despite defecting from one of the more prominent posts in the USSR. Similar to many men who wed attractive women, Sasha's father appeared to acknowledge his good fortune. And their marriage had been perfect, as far as I could tell. However, Wahoo was far away from Oxford in every way. Furthermore, Sasha's mother didn't seem to have ever planned on parting from Kat. Thus, it was currently impossible to predict what would happen to that marriage in the future. I awoke from my reverie to the other Jake. His question made sense, and I was happy he asked it. So if you are planning on getting back together, where are you going to live? Since the game began with the ball being rolled out. I glanced at Sasha and replied, I don't know. I can't leave my work here, and I really don't want to move back. I have no prospects in DC anymore, not that I wouldn't mind being a kept man. Sasha replied swiftly, I have no desire to be anywhere except where you are. I would be delighted to move here if you still want me. I looked over at her feeding cat in secret. Her eyes had the peaceful expression on them that mothers get when their child is nursing them. I said, that's a silly question. I am never leaving either of you again. I said, but a bachelor professor's rooms are a little inconvenient for the three of us. Then, a little reluctantly, I said, and is your mother planning on staying? Primarily because I didn't want to wind up in the gulag. Her mother shot me a glare that would have given South Beach, Miami a run for its money, and replied, as you said, honor demands that I stay with Katerina. Was there a glimmer of real feeling in that expressionless Soviet face? I hoped that Ilya, whom I called Bill, was fond of the weather in England. I replied, well then, we have a lot of planning to do since I need to find a place to live, fast. I assume that you will be staying with us until your husband joins us, I remarked, turning to face Sasha's mother. With a flirty enjoyment, she looked at me and murmured, of course, darling. The old Bolshevik was definitely pulling off the Eastern Europe femme fatale. Even though her short time here was 45 years, it was then that Brit spoke up. It was difficult to ignore the joy in her voice. Her typical accent is the traditional English university accent, known as received pronunciation. However, in her excitement, her status as the sole daughter of a real English earl gives her a much more Belgravian voice than a Balliol one. Oh my goodness, that solves our problem, she exclaimed to her husband. What problem? I asked, because aside from living an immaculate life in a sprawling estate overlooking Matthew Arnold's field, I could see no faults in her life. Britt looked me in the eyes and replied, Daddy wants us to move to the estate in Gloucestershire. He has offered me a living trust including most of the grounds, and both Jake and I have taken positions with GCHQ in anticipation of that. But we still have the house here on Boars Hill. Perhaps you would like to live there. Unfortunately, I am a bit short of the 3 million quid asking price, I exclaimed, laughing heartily. Britt replied, no silly, I mean live there. We don't want any money for that. We have more money than we know what to do with. And Jake just keeps making more. We don't know where to put it all. I would love to contribute to your new life, while, at the same time, we would know that our other estate is in good hands. Jake replied, yeah, the money is useless short of insulating the walls with it. I grinned at them both and replied, that is very kind of you. Both of you have been wonderful pals. But I need to do this myself. I make plenty of money and my pride forbids me from living off of the charity of my friends. That was well inside my comfort zone. The other Jake added, okay, then let's talk business. The lease on that would be around $8,000 a month. I would be willing to knock it down to $5,000 for the right tenant, somebody I could trust. I responded, how long would the lease be? Jake replied, we are building a house on Britt's father's estate, and the upkeep is going to be a challenge even with my kind of investments. I own the Boars Hill house outright, so the longer the lease the more reliable my income stream. How about if I lease it to you for 30 years and we can renegotiate when we are both in our 70s? That was said with a grin. The offer seems nearly too good to be true. Though I knew they would be kind and, more significantly, mostly absent landlords, I would still be a tenant. I gave Sasha a look. Her eyes gleamed. I turned to face my domineering mother-in-law. I assume that you have a guest house that Ilya and I can stay in, she stated with a voice that let no arguments pass. With a light grin, Britt remarked, it's a groundskeeper's cottage, but it has 3 bedrooms. After growing up in a 2-room apartment with her entire extended family, Sasha's mother asked, why would you need so much space for a groundskeeper? With a bewildered expression on her face. It was not simple. It was exhausting to have to move out of both my living quarters and Sasha's considerably more settled life. But in 2 months, I had become a rural squire, living with my lovely wife and children. Across the meadow, in the groundskeeper's cottage, moved Sasha's mother. Compared to her Oahu home, it was bigger and more pleasant. Thus, they smoothly transitioned into household bliss when her spouse finally arrived. If my wife had moved me from the beautiful environs of Hawaii to whatever the weather was like in the UK, I would have been furious. However, he accepted everything calmly. I guess his time in the Navy had acclimated him to moving. He was also used to tyranny from his time spent living with Sasha's mother. My tiny angel was still doing well. Now that she is 4 years old, she still possesses the same joyful disposition and lively intellect that I originally noticed in her eyes. She is a flurry of activity now, though. I believe that anything would be acceptable to me in order to bring her happiness. However, that was a slight understatement. The ones that enforce discipline are her mother and grandmother. Me, I'm her co-conspirator. Just her and I go everywhere and get into everything. Kat now has a brother. Ivan is almost a year old, and he can already walk and speak. His mother and 2 grandparents, who view him as a family heirloom, oversee his life. If I could see into the future, I could see him playing in the NFL or the Premier League in England. Though he isn't my gorgeous Katerina, I still love him. Still, Sasha and I are the protagonists of the story, and that is how it ends. When we started living together again, the problems were certain to come up. There was a reason we split up. And even though, with Kat's help, the odds were in favor of reconstructing our marriage, it was an excruciatingly long period before we could go back to our former lives. I assumed her mother's presence would cause a great deal of commotion. In actuality, though, she operated similarly to a nuclear reactor's control rods. I shared a residence with Sasha. However, we were still re-establishing our intimate relationship from before. Furthermore, we were not sharing a bed at all. For Sasha in particular, that was challenging. However, the initial point of conflict had been bonding, and it was a place none of us had yet reached. I cherished her. She was in love with me, and we did not take long to restore the small, personal touches that lovers share. However, even though it was obvious that we both genuinely desired it, every time we appeared to be making progress, Tom O'Leary would appear and make it a three-way, and that prompted inquiries that I was hesitant to respond to. The graphic images I had of their affair would not leave my mind. Did she treat him in the same way? What was it that she'd done differently? Was she more abandoned or hotter with him? Was he more of a partner? On her end, she was so overcome with guilt that she was unable to unwind or even engage in the activity. Whether it was because she read my fury on my face is a mystery to me. Alternatively, it could be that her dark experiences had greatly inhibited her. Both of us made an effort. Oh my, she might give a stone idol a serious case of the looks department. However, we were never able to start the motor. Eventually, she would cry and I would become enraged as we would both turn over, facing away from one another. To say that we were both really stressed would be an understatement. Her mother prevented it from blowing up, though it could have if she hadn't been present. It wasn't really focused. She was simply the fierce person she was. She was also there at all times. There was no denying her devotion for her grandchild and daughter. Furthermore, until we could write a new chapter in our shared history, her unwavering will to just endure stopped everything from blowing up in our faces. The truth is that when we got back together, we were genuinely strangers. Romantic books don't address that. It is simply expected that when people discuss reconciliation, everyone's mindset returns to the blissful period before the breakup. However, we had been living apart for a while, and we were going in different paths before Kat came around, and with good reason, I may add. After that, we had no past together as husband and wife other than the experience of losing that wonderful feeling due to betrayal. We had changed into different persons in the interim. That's what 2 years of pure alienation can do to you. Therefore, the first half year was a getting to know you phase without any passionate fog of war that obscures new lovers' senses. It was intriguing since it made us both discover things about each other that you normally only do when you start dating. Usually, you decide if you are a good fit after first becoming familiar with this unusual new person's quirks. You can only feel secure enough to get married when you've made that choice. Conversely, I was married to someone I had known for so long that we were practically the same person, but who, after we were banished from the Garden of Eden, might as well have been unknown to me. I realized that my comprehension of Sasha's cognitive processes had diminished. Furthermore, the Sasha I had known growing up wasn't the person she had become into. She had gone through a protracted time of introspection and was no longer quite as jovial as she had been before her fall. She now had to take care of the kids, and she did so with a strong, motherly love. Even so, we engaged in our typical activities together. We no longer shared the laid-back feeling of joy and friendship that we had on the first occasion, and we were less likely to joke and tease one another, which was a clear sign of disaffection. The truth was, each of us very much went about our own business. She and her mother fussed over Kat while I continued to spend a lot of time in the lab. Both of us were getting tired of the lack of joy. It appeared as though we were approaching the unavoidable conclusion of the line. Then Sasha plucked up the strength to confront our problems head-on. We were having supper and a pint at the head of the river one lovely English summer's evening. The swans were out in full force as the Thames flowed by. As only that region of England can produce in the summer, it was a wonderful warm evening. Furthermore, the strange light helps to explain a lot of the Midsummer Night's Dream's mystique. Every man on the large patio was, to put it mildly, sizing up Sasha, with some even sneering. I walked in to fetch us a refill. I had a classic English bitter and she has gin and tonics. There was a man seated at the table when I returned. He reminded everyone of O'Leary. He was confident, attractive, bordering on stunning, expensively attired, and utterly conceited. Nothing about what I saw pleased me. She was flirting, and he was intent. I gave her the drink when I arrived at the table and took a seat. With a sly smile on her face, she turned to face me and said, "This is Graham, sweetheart. He also wants to play punt with me. Shall I accompany him? I think punts are useful for 3 things only: carrying duck hunters, entertaining tourists, and playing under the shadow of riverside willows." That simply struck me as a jest. Threateningly, I added, "You should do whatever you think is right, my dear." There was no way this marriage would succeed. I wanted to know if I could get my Kebble rooms back. She got up with style. He got up excitedly. My heart fell as heavy as a fallen anvil. "Thank you for the offer, Graham, but I'm afraid I must decline," she murmured, taking his hand in hers. "I have a lot of topics to discuss with my spouse tonight." He remained there for a moment looking completely nonplussed, as if he had no idea what to do next. Had he never been turned down before? Then he turned and made an embarrassing quick escape. That was an object lesson, she continued, turning her unfathomable crystal blue eyes on me as she sat back down and took a cunning sip of her drink. This is where it all ends tonight. That could have come off as an ultimatum to me, but she obviously wanted to take a position alongside me. She was telling me that we would either work together to solve our dilemma or we would both literally perish trying. What you just saw happens to me every time I go anywhere, she declared. They have even made advances on me when I'm with Katerina and my mother, and I think they're all bugs to me. In my life, there is just one man. That was a decision I took 15 years ago, and I've never looked back. She paused and appeared thoughtful. But we can't keep living like this, she continued. I am aware that I let you down. I can't take the bell off, though. We have put in a great deal of effort to regain most of what we lost. We are now a couple. I'm aware of it. You are the greatest father in the world, and we get along better and better every day. Just trying to live up to the example you set, I lovingly intervened. But I want it all, she continued. In every way possible, I want you to be my husband. I hurt all over for you. We will never be completely together as husband and wife until we are able to live a regular life. That concludes my opening salvo. What are your thoughts about that? Really, it's very easy. I see you voluntarily sharing the same intimacy with Tom when we are intimate. Additionally, it overflows my mind with ideas. Oh, instead of just doing what comes naturally, I start thinking about every noise and movement you make, I remarked with a frown. She answered, thank you for that, with a resolute and comprehending look on her face. When we try to make love, I know how it feels. I am aware that you are considering me in relation to another man. And rather than hunger and desire, self-consciousness and guilt are my main emotions. She was putting her lips together. Finally, with trembling, I got up and sat down on the bed beside her, still reeling from my journey to Never Never Land. Even though she was face down in a pool of saliva, I could see the corner of her mouth move. I said, that exorcised a lot of ghosts. You think? She murmured, sarcastically. I wish I could tell that we started playing like bunny bunnies right away after that night. However, the real reality is this. Even so, we had our times. But since we cared for one another, we gradually overcame them. And we played whack-a-mole with any ghost that raised its ugly head until it vanished. This time, our love was mature, and whatever we had given up to get there seemed worthwhile because of the confidence of our unity. Maybe all it takes to be happy in the end is persistence. I'm not sure. However, I am aware that because we overcame the challenges life threw at us, our life is now immensely better. Together, we persevered despite the effort and attention required. Finale. She breezed out of inner London Crown Court still wearing her robes. Her stunning ice blue eyes stood out against her dark auburn hair. Though her mother and grandparents are very attractive, my dear Katerina really raised the game. She came over to talk to us in a happy mood. Her companion trailed closely behind, wearing the same joyful expression. Her significant other was a stunning woman, 3 years her senior. Her brilliant and kind gray eyes bore witness to her lineage. Her parents were truly honored by Lady Brooke Ashley Barnes. The mix of brilliance and sheer willpower exuded by those two stunning young ladies was almost palpable. Other than themselves, they belonged to no one. Furthermore, they were already well known in the British legal community. They were Barnes and Schneider's two original partners. Barrister Brooke was the virtuous one. She had a lawyer partner in me, my beloved Kat. Brooke handles the litigation, while Kat handles the legal work. When combined, they constitute a formidable power. From young girl dolls to groups of guys, they had been lifetime pals for a very long time. They had always loved and supported one another, despite taking divergent paths. Brooke via the Inns of Court and Kat through Oxford's DPhil program. Brooke possesses exceptional courtroom demeanor and razor-sharp wit. In the entire legal profession, Kat is the most deadly intellect. She never overlooks a subtlety and has an amazing eye for detail. My sweet little girl, at least, has one talent that she got from me. She embodies her mother's essence in terms of her physical beauty. The father would never want to visit the place. She also exudes a playful sense of humor in all facets of her existence. For a short while, her mother had lost that skill. However, she was able to retrieve it, and suddenly she was a really human woman. Excitement lighted up the girls' features, and they were having the kind of celebratory chat that two teammates who had just won the FA Cup or the Super Bowl might have. It seems like they had generated a substantial profit for someone today. Did you see the look on his face when I skewered him with that little nugget you dug up? Brooke asked, smiling, as they approached us. He practically held up his severed balls for everybody in the chamber to see, tittered Kat. She stopped then, seeming ashamed. At that, her mother grinned. In my opinion, she remains a radiant beauty even at the age of 63. And the life we have created together is a credit to her feminine wisdom and insight. Well, we need to celebrate. How about the George Inn? She asked, glancing at me. Her 89-year-old mother was waiting for us all there, even more stolid than the Kremlin. The four of us turned and headed down Borough High Street toward the George, which used to be a hangout for writers like Charles Dickens during his time covering the London courts. Sasha was up front discussing her parents with Brooke. I couldn't resist examining those swaying hips and legs. My wife is 63 years old, and she still has an incredible body. I was strolling along Kat. She seemed unusually thoughtful for someone who had just experienced a tremendous victory. At last, she took hold of my hand with hers, and through the commotion of London, we strolled side by side. She had a tear streaming down her cheek when I turned to face her. All of a sudden, I was really worried. I said, "What's wrong, my little kitty cat?" She spoke with emotion, saying, "Daddy, I love you. Never lose sight of that. You're the reason I am who I am, and I'll be appreciative forever. I will always be your little daughter, and I will always strive to make you proud." I stared at that flawless face. He was the one with whom I fell in love right away 25 long years ago. And whatever the price I had paid, it was all fully and totally worthwhile. "I know, my sweet cat," I said, "and things will always be the way." Together, we strolled into the bright future holding hands. My comment, why was he so tough on the boyfriend, while completely forgiving the slutty, lying wife? Is this a repeated pattern we are seeing? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will see you in the next one.